Well, you join Wayne Phillips here on the Flow Morning Show, and that was Dua Lipa and We're Good. Well, I'll tell you what, the federal government thinks it's good after it seemed cock-a-hoot, at least its front bench, as it was announcing the federal budget and what appeared to be a reasonable outcome from those in the media. However, it may not be all smooth sailing. There is the issue of opening the international borders, which has got some conjecture about it. And then there is the issue of the debt. The spending creates debt and somebody has to pay for it. And some on the government side are concerned that the coalition is losing its mantle of being the one that actually is small government, small debt, that lack of spending and allowing the economy to do the heavy lifting. Whereas the normal principle was that the ALP would spend up big when in government and then have somebody else pay it back. Well, that may not be the case. Anthony Albanese, in his budget response last week, made some very interesting comments about spending smaller. And I wonder whether or not there's a changing of the guard when it comes to the position of the two major political forces in this nation. John McDonnell, in writing about this morning at FlowNews24, has said that on Sunday it was reported that Liberal MPs Jason Falinski, Tim Wilson, Dave Sharma and Katie Allen were calling for borders to be opened earlier than the middle of next year. It's a long time, isn't it, to be waiting for international travel and for those sorts of things to take place. The Prime Minister has claimed that the date has been set by medical experts. But two of those experts are the Victorian Chief Medical Officer Brett Sutton and the former Commonwealth Deputy Chief Medical Officer Nick Coatsworth, and they have now called for an early border opening. The Prime Minister wants to keep the borders closed so the voters will feel secure, but there is a chance that the medical advisors will leave him high and dry. More concerning for the Prime Minister may be the dissatisfaction with his leadership among a number of backbenchers. There are two major complaints from the backbench that writes John. Firstly, that the Prime Minister lacks conviction and is dragging the party too far to the left. And secondly, that the backbench is excluded from making any input into policy. As one backbencher told FlowNews24, these days policy is made by interest groups and the budget was framed by focus groups. Queensland backbenchers in particular are unhappy with the fact that the Prime Minister has shifted his ideological position. They say the Prime Minister sees the only purpose of government is to win elections. Unhappy backbenchers argue that the purpose of coalition governments should be to reform the economy and the legal system to enable greater choice for citizens and businesses. They argue that the Prime Minister should have used the pandemic to reform the tax and transfer system and that the Federation and the National Security Strategy should also have been looked at. They say openly that the PM lacks conviction. One Queensland backbencher has told FlowNews24 and John in this article that Scott has lost the plot and that he has crab-walked the executive to the left while the rest of the coalition has stayed true to their values. The other significant grievance is that backbenchers were totally excluded from the framing of this budget or indeed any of the significant decisions that have been taken in relation to the pandemic. They argue that this deprives them of the opportunity to put their constituents' interests forward in the framing of policy, and that the backbenchers complain that state premiers have more influence over policy than they do. They say that state Labor premiers are only interested in their urban voters because there were state elections and they were to be won and lost. This means a large number of regional electorates are treated badly or neglected. There are no threats to Scott Morrison's leadership at the moment, writes John, because the executive is rock solid behind him. However, the discontent is strong enough from some backbenchers to contemplate voting against the budget, especially if Labor agrees to support it. This would have a major ramification for the Prime Minister's election campaign, as Labor will have a field day with the government disunity as it throws the criticism of the government back at them, and the criticism more likely of its big spend and not a plan of repayment in the near future. It is a very good article from John. It's at flownews24.com.au. I think there is some fire behind it. It may only be a little spark and a bit of smoke, but if there is a good day like it was on Sunday for burning, then it's likely that a lot of bonfires are going to get going by the time we get to the next federal election.